My name is Helen, and I am 59 years old. As a retired police officer specializing in domestic violence cases, I dedicated my career to protecting the vulnerable and giving voice to those who couldn't protect themselves. After my husband Arthur passed away when my children were young, I raised Linda and Mark as a single mother, working double shifts and overtime to provide them with a stable, loving home. For years, I quietly carried the immense emotional and financial burden of Linda's untreated bipolar disorder, watching my brilliant, beautiful daughter spiral into darkness while I spent over $100,000 of my retirement savings on therapies, medications, and treatments that she refused to take consistently. I thought I had seen the worst of human cruelty in my 25 years as a police officer. I was wrong. The worst came from my own family. It happened on a Tuesday evening that started like any other. Linda had been staying with me for weeks, another period, where her life had fallen apart and she needed shelter. But this time was different. This time, she was demanding $5,000 for what I knew were drugs her eyes wild with the kind of desperation that comes from severe addiction compounded by untreated mental illness. When I refused to enable her self-destruction, Linda grabbed a kitchen knife and turned on Mark, my gentle son, who had only tried to calm her down. I watched in horror as she slashed his arm, blood spattering across my kitchen wall, as she screamed that she would kill him if I didn't give her the money. In that moment, I faced an impossible choice. I could protect one child only by betraying another. With my heart breaking and my hands shaking, I called 911 on my own daughter. "You're dead to me, Mom," Linda screamed as the officers led her away, her voice echoing through the neighborhood. "You have no humanity. You're a monster." My siblings, Aunt Carol and Uncle Bob, arrived before the ambulance left. Their reaction was swift and devastating. "You betrayed your own blood," Carol yelled. "You're a monster. You're not family anymore." My agonizing choice to protect Mark was twisted into an act of monstrous cruelty, my humanity questioned by the very people who should have understood that sometimes love requires the courage to make impossible decisions. Yet as despair threatened to consume me, something deeper stirred within my police officer's soul. What Linda, my family, and even her defense lawyer didn't know was that I had been documenting everything, meticulous logs of Linda's escalating episodes, her threats, her violence. Most importantly, I had been wearing a discreet body camera that captured Linda's violent knife attack on Mark in devastating detail. This time, her illness wouldn't just consume our family. It would force a reckoning that would expose the truth, secure Mark's safety, and prove that sometimes the most loving thing a mother can do looks like the cruelest. 3 days after that nightmare in my kitchen, I sat beside Mark's hospital bed, watching my 22-year-old son sleep fitfully under the harsh fluorescent lights. His left arm was bandaged from wrist to elbow, 15 stitches, holding together the wound his sister had inflicted with a knife that I had bought to prepare family dinners. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent my career responding to domestic violence calls, comforting victims, arresting perpetrators, and here I was, the mother of both victim and attacker, trying to navigate a system I knew from the other side. Mark stirred his eyes, focusing on me with a mixture of pain and confusion that broke my heart all over again. "Mom," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the trauma and medication, "is Linda really in jail?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with years of enabling, of hoping, of watching Linda's beautiful mind be consumed by an illness she refused to acknowledge or treat. How do you explain to one child that you had to choose his safety over his sister's freedom? "Yes, sweetheart, I said, taking his uninjured hand in mine. She's being held pending charges for assault with a deadly weapon. The district attorney is treating this as a serious felony. Mark's face crumpled, and I saw the confusion that would probably haunt him for years. But she's sick, Mom. She didn't mean it. Did she? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Aunt Carol's name appeared on the screen and my stomach dropped. I knew this call would come, but I wasn't prepared for the venomous assault that followed. How could you do this? Helen. Carol's voice was shrill with manufactured outrage. How could you betray your own flesh and blood? You put Linda in jail. You have no humanity. You're a monster, and you're losing your mind. The accusations hit me like physical blows. This was my older sister, someone who had known Linda since birth, who had watched me struggle with her illness for years, who had seen the bruises on my arms from Linda's previous episodes. Carol, you weren't there, I said, my voice shaking, despite my efforts to stay calm. Linda could have killed Mark. She was going to kill Mark. I had to protect him. You ruined her life. Uncle Bob's voice came through the speaker, apparently listening in on Carol's phone. You're dead to us, Helen. You're not family anymore. This is all your fault. You should have controlled her. The word controlled made me laugh bitterly. How do you control a hurricane? How do you reason with a mind fractured by severe mental illness and drug addiction? How do you explain to people who have never lived with the daily terror of loving someone who might hurt you, that sometimes love looks like letting them face consequences? I spent over $100,000 trying to get Linda help. I said, my voice rising despite Mark's presence. I've been to every therapist, every psychiatrist, every treatment center in 3 states. I've sacrificed my retirement, my peace of mind, my relationship with both my children, trying to save Linda from herself. Where were you during all of that? Where was your concern when Linda was stealing from me, threatening me, destroying my house? But they had already hung up, leaving me alone with Mark's questioning eyes and the terrible knowledge that my family's cruelty was just beginning. The next blow came from an unexpected source. Mr. Davies, Linda's court-appointed defense attorney, held a press conference outside the courthouse that made my blood run cold. Standing behind a podium with Linda's booking photo displayed on an easel beside him, he painted a picture of my daughter as a victim of my overly zealous parenting and failure to provide appropriate mental health care. My client, Linda Peterson, is a young woman struggling with mental illness who has been failed by a system that criminalizes symptoms instead of providing treatment, he said to the gathered reporters. This case represents a tragic example of how family dysfunction and inappropriate law enforcement response can destroy a vulnerable person's life. The implication was clear to anyone listening. I was the problem. My call to 911, my willingness to press charges, my failure as a mother had created this situation. Linda was the victim, and I was the villain. The story ran on local news that evening, complete with file footage of me in my police uniform from a community event years earlier. The contrast was stark and deliberate. The cold, uniformed officer who had turned on her own child versus the sweet-faced young woman whose mental illness made her a victim of the system. Mark watched the news report in stunned silence, his bandaged arm resting across his chest, like evidence of the lie being told about our family. When the segment ended, he looked at me with new confusion in his eyes. Mom, why are they making it sound like you did something wrong? Linda tried to kill me. I was there. I remember everything. His words should have been reassuring, but I could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. When everyone around you is saying that black is white, when authority figures and family members are all telling the same false story, it becomes harder to trust your own memory, your own experience. Sometimes the truth is complicated, Mark. I said, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes people who weren't there think they understand better than the people who lived through it. But I need you to remember exactly what happened that night, because that's what's real. The social isolation began almost immediately. Arthur's extended family, people who had been part of our lives for decades, started avoiding me at community events. I could see them whispering when I walked into the grocery store, pointing when they thought I wasn't looking. The woman who had arrested their own daughter, the mother who had chosen the system over her family. At church, where I had been a member for over 15 years, conversations stopped when I approached. Linda had been popular there, charming and beautiful when she was stable, and people remembered her that way. They didn't know about the holes she had punched in my walls, the money she had stolen from my purse, the nights I had slept with my bedroom door locked because I was afraid of my own child. Carol and Uncle Bob's campaign against me escalated quickly. Within a week of Linda's arrest, they were calling relatives, neighbors, anyone who would listen, spreading their version of events. According to them, I was a controlling mother who had finally snapped and used my police connections to have my daughter arrested for a minor family disagreement. They conveniently omitted Mark's injuries, Linda's history of violence, her drug use, her refusal to take medication or attend therapy. In their narrative, Linda was a misunderstood young woman whose mother had betrayed her in the cruelest possible way. The pressure campaign extended to legal threats as well. Mr. Davies filed motion after motion designed to discredit my testimony and paint me as an unreliable witness. He requested my personnel files from the police department, looking for any complaints or disciplinary actions that might suggest I had a history of excessive force or poor judgment. When that search turned up nothing, he pivoted to attacking my mental state, suggesting that the stress of dealing with Linda's illness had affected my ability to make rational decisions. He painted me as a burned-out cop who had brought her work problems home and treated her own daughter like a criminal. But the cruelest blow came from Carol and Bob's ultimatum delivered through a lawyer's letter that arrived on a Friday afternoon when I was already struggling to hold myself together. Ms. Peterson, the letter read, "Our clients Carol Johnson and Robert Johnson demand that you immediately withdraw all criminal charges against Linda Peterson and issue a public apology for your false accusations. Failure to comply within 48 hours will result in our clients pursuing all available legal remedies, including, but not limited to, a civil lawsuit for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress." They were threatening to sue me for protecting my son from his sister's violence. They wanted me to publicly declare that my own experience, Mark's injuries, the blood on my kitchen floor, the terror in my son's eyes as his sister held a knife to his throat, that all of it was a lie I had fabricated to hurt Linda. Sitting in my empty house that night, holding that letter in my trembling hands, I felt more alone than I had ever felt in my life. My daughter was in jail, my son was traumatized, my family had disowned me, and the community I had served and protected for decades was treating me like a pariah. But as I sat there in the silence, surrounded by the evidence of Linda's latest destructive episode, I felt something cold and determined settling in my chest. They wanted to rewrite history to pretend that love means enabling someone's self-destruction, to claim that protecting an innocent victim is somehow cruel. They had forgotten that I wasn't just a mother grieving for her broken family. I was a trained investigator who had spent decades documenting domestic violence and building cases that would hold up in court. And I had been building a case about Linda's escalating violence since her first threatening episode 2 years ago. The legal assault on my credibility intensified with surgical precision. Carol and Uncle Bob weren't content with simply demanding I drop the charges. They wanted to completely destroy my ability to testify against Linda or make any future decisions about her care. 3 weeks after Linda's arrest, I received legal papers that made my blood run cold. Carol and Bob were filing for legal guardianship of Linda, claiming that I was mentally unfit to manage her crisis and portraying themselves as the loving family members who truly understood Linda's needs. The petition was filled with lies so brazen they took my breath away. According to the document, I had systematically isolated Linda from supportive family members, had refused to seek appropriate mental health treatment despite obvious signs of crisis, and had escalated minor family conflicts into criminal matters due to my own psychological instability. They painted themselves as concerned relatives who had been trying for years to intervene on Linda's behalf, only to be blocked by my controlling behavior and professional arrogance. They claimed that my background in law enforcement had made me overly punitive in my approach to Linda's illness and unable to distinguish between criminal behavior and mental health symptoms. But the most devastating part of their petition was the demand for access to all of my personal files regarding Linda's condition. They wanted my private journals, my communications with therapists, my financial records showing the money I had spent on Linda's care, everything I had documented about her escalating violence and drug use. Mrs. Peterson has maintained extensive files on our client, their lawyer wrote, which suggest an unhealthy obsession with controlling and monitoring Linda's behavior. We believe these records will demonstrate a pattern of manipulation and emotional abuse that has contributed to Linda's current crisis. They were trying to turn my careful documentation, my attempts to track Linda's symptoms, and get her appropriate help into evidence of my own mental illness. Every loving, desperate attempt I had made to understand and help my daughter was being reframed as proof that I was the problem. The revelation of their true motivations came through an unexpected source. Maria, a young woman who cleaned the jail where Linda was being held, had become concerned about the conversations she was overhearing during visiting hours. Maria's own mother had struggled with mental illness, and she recognized something wrong in the dynamic she was witnessing. "Mrs. Peterson," she said, when she called me, her voice nervous but determined, "I don't usually get involved in inmates' business, but something's not right with your daughter's visitors. They're not talking about getting her help. They're talking about getting back at you." She described conversations where Carol and Bob told Linda that I was betraying her for money, referencing a non-existent inheritance that I was supposedly trying to steal. They were feeding Linda conspiracy theories about my motivations, convincing her that my call to 911 had been about greed rather than protecting Mark. "They keep telling her that you're trying to have her declared incompetent so you can control her finances," Maria continued. "But ma'am, your daughter doesn't have any finances. She's been living with you, so I don't understand what inheritance they're talking about." The chilling clarity hit me like a physical blow. Carol and Bob weren't trying to help Linda. They were using her illness and her vulnerability as weapons to punish me for perceived slights that went back decades. This wasn't about family loyalty or mental health advocacy. This was about malicious revenge, and Linda was just the tool they were using to destroy me. That night alone in my house, with only the memories of happier times, I made the decision to reveal a truth I had buried for over 20 years, a secret so painful and shameful that I had never told anyone, not even Arthur, before he died, not even my children. When Carol was 25 years old, just starting her career as a real estate agent, she had gotten involved in a fraudulent investment scheme that left dozens of elderly clients penniless. She had convinced retirees to invest their life savings in properties that didn't exist, developments that were never built, retirement communities that existed only on paper. When the scheme collapsed, Carol faced federal fraud charges that would have sent her to prison for 15 years and destroyed any hope of a legitimate career. The victims, many of them elderly women who reminded me of my own mother, had lost everything they had worked their entire lives to save. I had used my position as a police officer, my knowledge of legal procedures, and my connections in the justice system to quietly make the problem disappear. I had spent $50,000 of my own money to compensate some of the victims, convinced others not to press charges, and helped create a paper trail that made Carol look like another victim of the scheme rather than one of its architects. Most painfully, I had convinced myself that I was protecting my family's reputation, that exposing Carol's crimes would hurt my children's future, that covering up her theft was somehow the loving thing to do. I had compromised my own ethics and professional integrity to save my sister from the consequences of her actions. Carol had never acknowledged what I had done for her, had never shown gratitude or remorse. In her mind, the problem had simply gone away, proof that she was smarter than the victims who had lost their savings and the investigators who had failed to build a case against her. Now, 20 years later, she was using Linda's illness to attack me with the same callous disregard for others that had driven her original crimes. She had learned that family loyalty could be weaponized, that my love for my children could be used against me, that my desire to protect people I cared about made me vulnerable to manipulation. When I tried to subtly reference my past sacrifices for Carol during one of our increasingly hostile phone conversations, hoping to remind her of what family loyalty really looked like, her response was brutal and revealing. "Helen, you're always trying to make me feel guilty with your so-called favors," she snapped. "Your past choices are your own business. You made those decisions for your own reasons, not for me. Don't try to manipulate me with ancient history." Uncle Bob's response was equally dismissive. "Honestly, Helen, you're getting quite paranoid about all this. You're trying to twist old stories to make yourself look like some kind of saint. It's actually pretty disturbing." They had rewritten history so completely in their own minds that my sacrifice had become my manipulation. My love had become my selfishness. My protection of them had become my attempt to control them. The same psychological mechanism that allowed Carol to forget her victims now allowed both of them to forget my sacrifices. But the cruelest manipulation came through Mr. Davies Linda's defense attorney, who presented me with a settlement offer that was designed to destroy me financially and emotionally while allowing everyone else to escape accountability. According to his proposal, if I would publicly withdraw the criminal charges against Linda, agree to pay for all of her legal fees and ongoing medical treatment, and transfer all decision-making authority over Linda to Carol and Bob, then Linda would graciously agree not to sue me for emotional distress and false imprisonment. The cost would be over $100,000 per year for the rest of Linda's life money I didn't have for treatment that Linda would likely refuse, just as she had refused all previous treatment. I would be financially ruined to enable a system that had already failed Linda dozens of times, all while being publicly branded as the villain who had traumatized my own daughter. "This is a generous offer," Mr. Davies said, with the practiced sincerity of someone who specialized in manipulation. "It allows your family to heal while ensuring that Linda receives the care she needs. The alternative is a very public trial, where Linda's suffering will be displayed for the entire community to see." The message was clear: take the blame, pay the price, and accept the narrative that I was the problem, or watch them destroy what remained of my relationship with Linda through a trial that would focus on her victimhood rather than Mark's injuries. But as I sat in that lawyer's office, listening to him outline the terms of my surrender, I felt something unexpected relief. Because finally, the mask had come off. Finally, the people who had been pretending to care about Linda's well-being had revealed their true motivations. They weren't interested in Linda's recovery or Mark's trauma or the truth about what had happened in my kitchen. They were interested in my destruction, my humiliation, my complete surrender to their version of reality. And that clarity gave me something I hadn't felt since this nightmare began, the determination to fight back with everything I had. The final assault on my family relationships came with the cold efficiency of a coordinated military campaign. 6 weeks after Linda's arrest, after my refusal to accept their settlement offer, Carol and Bob executed a plan designed to permanently sever every connection I had to my daughter and my extended family. The restraining order papers arrived on a Monday morning, delivered by a sheriff's deputy who looked uncomfortable as he handed me the thick envelope. Inside were legal documents that redefined my existence in the most devastating terms possible. According to the court papers, I was now legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Linda, Carol, Uncle Bob, or any other members of my extended family. The order was based on fabricated allegations of child abuse against Linda and emotional harassment of Carol and Bob, accusations so absurd they would have been laughable if they weren't destroying my life. The petition described me as a dangerous individual with a history of using law enforcement connections to intimidate and control family members. It claimed that my treatment of Linda constituted systematic psychological abuse designed to maintain dominance over a vulnerable adult with mental illness. Most devastatingly, it alleged that my call to 911 had been a calculated act of revenge against Linda for seeking independence from her controlling mother, rather than a desperate attempt to protect Mark from serious injury or death. The restraining order meant that I couldn't attend family gatherings, couldn't visit Linda in jail, couldn't even accidentally encounter my siblings at public events without facing arrest and prosecution. In the eyes of the law, I had become a stalker, a danger to the very people I had spent my life protecting and supporting. But the legal banishment was just the beginning of their campaign to erase me from Linda's life completely. Despite everything that had happened, despite the violence and the arrests and the court proceedings, part of me still hoped that my relationship with my daughter could somehow be salvaged. That hope died when I tried one last desperate attempt to reach the Linda. I remembered the little girl who used to fall asleep in my lap while I read her bedtime stories, the teenager who had dreams of becoming a teacher before her illness consumed those dreams. I spent days putting together a photo album that chronicled Linda's life from birth through high school before the worst symptoms of her bipolar disorder had emerged. Pictures of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, school plays, family vacations, all the moments when she had been happy and healthy and full of potential. I wrote a letter to accompany the album, pouring my heart onto paper with the same careful attention I had once used to document crime scenes. I told her about the sleepless nights I had spent researching her condition, the doctors I had consulted, the treatments I had investigated. I reminded her of the times she had thanked me for not giving up on her, the moments of clarity when she had acknowledged how hard her illness was on our family. Most importantly, I tried to explain the impossible choice I had made the night she attacked Mark. How watching her hold a knife to her brother's throat had been the most terrifying moment of my life. How calling 911 had felt like cutting out my own heart. How I would have done anything to find another solution if one had existed. I left the album and letter on Carol's doorstep, hoping that she would at least pass them along to Linda, that some small part of my sister's humanity might be moved by my desperation to maintain a connection with my daughter. 3 days later, Carol posted a photo on social media that shattered what remained of my hope. She had torn my carefully assembled album apart, scattering the photos across her dining room table like garbage. The caption she wrote beneath the image was designed for maximum cruelty, cleaning out the clutter. Some people just can't let go of the past, moving forward from negativity and desperate attempts to manipulate. The photos I had treasured, the memories I had preserved, the evidence of Linda's capacity for joy and love, all of it had been destroyed with the same casual malice they had shown me. But it was the comments on the post that truly broke my heart. Extended family members and family friends who had known me for decades liked the post and added their own cruel observations about my obsession and inability to accept reality. The message was clear. I had been erased from my own family's story. The mother who had raised Linda, who had sacrificed everything to get her help, who had made the hardest decision of her life to protect her son, that woman no longer existed in their narrative. Linda's reaction to her court appearance was the final confirmation that she had been completely turned against me. When she was brought into the courtroom for her arraignment, shackled and wearing an orange jumpsuit, her eyes found mine across the gallery and filled with pure hatred. "You're dead to me, Mom," she screamed loud enough for everyone to hear. "You betrayed your own blood. I hope you rot in hell. You have no humanity. You're losing your mind, you evil witch." The venom in her voice, the absolute conviction that I was the villain in her story, the complete absence of any recognition of Mark's injuries or her own violent actions, all of it confirmed that the Linda I had known and loved was gone, replaced by someone who saw me as her enemy rather than her mother. Carol's final text message to me was brief and brutal. "Consider this closed. Helen, you lost. Don't contact us again. Ever." Mr. Davies reinforced their narrative in his comments to the media, describing me as an unstable former police officer whose inability to cope with her daughter's mental illness had led to a tragic escalation of family dysfunction. That night alone in my house with restraining orders that legally prohibited me from contacting anyone I loved, I finally broke down completely and revealed the secret that had been eating at me for over 15 years. The truth about Arthur, my late husband, my children's father, the man whose memory I had protected at the cost of my own peace of mind. Arthur hadn't died the hero's death that Mark and Linda believed. He hadn't succumbed to stress-related illness after an exemplary career in law enforcement. The truth was so much darker, so much more shameful, that I had constructed an elaborate lie to protect my children from ever learning what their father had really been. During his final years on the force, Arthur had been involved in a massive corruption scheme that netted over $1 million in bribes and extortion money. He had been part of a network of officers who protected drug dealers, falsified evidence, and terrorized witnesses who threatened to expose their activities. When Internal Affairs began investigating the corruption, Arthur knew that his arrest was inevitable. He also knew that the scandal would destroy our family's reputation, make our children targets for revenge, and strip away the police pension that was supposed to support us after his death. So he had come to me with a plan that required me to become complicit in covering up his crimes. He wanted to fake a stress-related breakdown that would allow him to retire with full benefits before the investigation could touch him. He needed me to corroborate his claims of PTSD, to lie to doctors about his symptoms, to help create a medical record that would protect him from criminal prosecution. The alternative, he explained, was that Mark and Linda would grow up knowing their father was a criminal, that our family would be destroyed by scandal, that the children would suffer for his mistakes for the rest of their lives. So I had done what I thought was the loving thing. I had helped Arthur fake his mental breakdown, had lied to investigators about his state of mind, had protected him from consequences until he died of an actual heart attack 2 years later, taking his secrets with him to the grave. I had spent 15 years telling my children stories about their father's heroism, his dedication to justice, his sacrifice for the community. I had let them build their identities around the idea that they came from a family of protectors, that service and integrity were their heritage. Now Linda was calling me a betrayer, accusing me of having no humanity, claiming that I was the one who had destroyed our family's honor. The cosmic irony was almost unbearable. I had sacrificed my own integrity to protect Arthur's reputation, and now his daughter was using his imaginary heroism as a weapon against me. But sitting in that empty house, legally banned from contact with the children I had raised and protected, I finally understood something that had taken me too long to learn. Love doesn't require you to enable someone's destruction. Protection doesn't mean covering up crimes or excusing violence. And family loyalty can't be built on lies, no matter how well-intentioned those lies might be. The reckoning I had promised was no longer just about Linda's mental illness or Carol's manipulation or even Mark's safety. It was about truth itself, about the difference between love and enabling, about the courage to do what's right, even when it destroys everything you thought you understood about your own life. They thought they had silenced me, erased me, reduced me to a broken woman whose own family had rejected her. They were about to discover that a retired police officer never stops collecting evidence, and I had been building a case that would expose not just Linda's violence, but the systematic manipulation that had turned my own family into weapons against me. The truth was coming, and it would be more devastating than any of them could imagine. The isolation that followed my legal banishment was unlike anything I had experienced in my 25 years as a police officer. I had seen people broken by the system, destroyed by their own families, abandoned by everyone they trusted, but I had never understood the psychological torture of complete erasure until I lived it myself. I sat in my empty house, legally prohibited from contacting my own children, surrounded by the ghosts of family celebrations and the weight of secrets that had consumed my life. The revelation about Arthur's corruption, the truth I had buried to protect my children's memory of their father, now felt like a poison eating away at my sanity. Every day brought new evidence that my entire life had been built on lies I had told to protect people who were now using those same lies to destroy me. Arthur's heroic legacy, Linda's illness, my siblings' supposed concern for family welfare, all of it was twisted into weapons against the woman who had sacrificed everything to maintain their carefully constructed narratives. The psychological prison was complete. I couldn't tell the truth about Arthur without destroying Mark's faith in his father. I couldn't expose Carol's past crimes without appearing to be a desperate woman making wild accusations. I couldn't even defend my decision to call 911 without seeming to attack Linda's illness rather than her violence. They had turned my love into evidence of my obsession, my protection into proof of my cruelty, my integrity into symptoms of my mental decline. Every virtue I had cultivated over decades of service was being reframed as a character flaw. Every sacrifice I had made was being twisted into evidence of my selfishness. But the public campaign against my professional reputation was perhaps the cruelest assault of all. Carol began subtly leaking details of my supposed erratic behavior to police benevolent associations and crisis intervention organizations, painting a picture of a former officer whose personal trauma had affected her judgment and stability. "We're concerned about Helen's recent behavior," she would say in carefully worded phone calls to people I had worked with for decades. "She seems to be having difficulty separating her personal problems from her professional training. We're worried she might be experiencing some cognitive decline, and her emotional attachments to cases seem unhealthy." The response was swift and devastating. Organizations that had once valued my expertise in domestic violence cases began quietly canceling my speaking engagements. Support groups where I had volunteered for years suddenly found reasons why my services were no longer needed. My reputation for strength and compassion, built over decades of dedicated service, was being systematically dismantled by innuendo and false concern. The irony was suffocating. I was being discredited for the very expertise that should have protected me from what was happening. My understanding of manipulation tactics, my knowledge of how abusers isolate their victims, my professional training in recognizing systematic campaigns of destruction, all of it was being used against me by people who understood exactly what they were doing. The financial pressure mounted with each passing day. The legal fees from defending myself against Carol's frivolous lawsuits were astronomical. My bank accounts had been frozen during the investigation into my supposed financial misconduct. Without income, without access to my savings, without the ability to work in my field, I couldn't keep up with basic expenses. Then came the eviction notice. Despite having owned my home for over 15 years, despite having equity that should have protected me, the combination of legal fees and frozen assets made it impossible to maintain my mortgage payments. The house where I had raised my children, where Arthur had died, where Linda had once felt safe, was being taken from me. The public auction of my possessions was deliberately scheduled and publicized by Carol to ensure maximum humiliation. Local media covered the troubled former police officer losing her home due to family disputes and financial mismanagement. My furniture, my photographs, my uniforms and commendations, everything that represented my life's work and achievements was sold to strangers for pocket change. I ended up in a crowded public shelter, sharing a room with 3 other women who had also lost everything to circumstances beyond their control. The facility was clean but impersonal, filled with the defeated and forgotten people who had fallen through society's safety net and landed in the bureaucratic maze of emergency housing. But the cruelest torture was watching what this nightmare was doing to Mark. My gentle son, already traumatized by Linda's violence, was being torn apart by the impossible position Carol and Bob had created for him. When he tried to visit me at the shelter, Carol's guardians physically blocked him from entering, claiming they were protecting him from my manipulation. "Mom, I don't know what to do." He wept during one of our brief supervised phone calls. "I can't choose between you and Linda. Why are you doing this to us? Why can't you just apologize and make this stop?" The anguish in his voice was unbearable. Carol and Bob had successfully convinced him that I was the one prolonging the family's suffering, that my refusal to accept their version of events was what was keeping us apart. They had turned my fight for truth into evidence of my stubbornness, my refusal to surrender into proof of my selfishness. "Mark," I said, my own voice breaking, "I'm not doing this to hurt you or Linda. I'm fighting because what happened in our kitchen was real. Your injuries were real. Linda's violence was real. If I give up now, if I let them rewrite what actually happened, then next time someone gets hurt, it might be worse. But I could hear the confusion in his silence, the doubt that Carol and Bob had planted about my motives and my mental state. My own son was beginning to question whether his mother was the reliable protector he had always believed me to be, or the delusional woman his relatives claimed I had become. In my darkest moment, when I was seriously considering whether it would be easier to simply disappear from my children's lives entirely, an unexpected lifeline appeared. Detective Miguel Rodriguez, a young officer I had mentored during his early years at the academy, reached out through the shelter's social worker. Miguel had heard about my situation through the law enforcement grapevine and was appalled by what was being said about my character and competence. He remembered me as the seasoned officer who had taught him how to handle domestic violence calls with compassion and precision, who had shown him the importance of documenting evidence and protecting victims from their abusers. "Sergeant Peterson," he said during our first phone call, using my old rank with the respect I hadn't heard in months. "I know who you are. I know your integrity. What they're saying about you doesn't match the woman who taught me how to be a real cop." More importantly, he offered concrete help. Miguel had connections with a network of retired legal professionals who specialized in elder abuse and high-conflict family cases. He also provided financial support to help me fight the legal battles that were draining my resources, money that came from officers who remembered my service and refused to believe the lies being spread about my character. "We take care of our own," he said simply. "And you're still one of us, no matter what anyone else says." For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. It wasn't hope exactly, not yet, but it was determination. A fierce, desperate resolve that whispered that maybe the truth could still matter. Maybe justice was still possible. Maybe the woman who had dedicated her life to protecting others could find a way to protect herself. The battle was far from over, but I was no longer fighting it alone. The courtroom where my maternal love was put on trial felt like a theater designed for maximum humiliation. Mr. Davies had orchestrated what he called a protection order hearing that was ostensibly meant to protect Linda from my supposed harassment, but was actually a carefully staged performance designed to criminalize every attempt I had made to help my daughter. The hearing was deliberately scheduled during peak media hours and publicized as a case study in family dysfunction and inappropriate law enforcement response. Davies wanted an audience for my destruction witnesses to the narrative he had spent months constructing about the dangerous mother who had turned on her own child. I sat at the defendant's table, legally represented by an overworked public defender who barely knew my case, while Davies presented his fabricated evidence with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his own lies. He had doctored emails, selectively edited voicemails, and compiled statements from distant relatives who barely knew Linda, but were eager to contribute to the family drama. "Your Honor," Davies began with practiced solemnity, "my client, Linda Peterson, is a vulnerable young woman struggling with mental illness who has been systematically harassed and intimidated by the very person who should be protecting her. Mrs. Helen Peterson has used her background in law enforcement to create a campaign of control and manipulation that has severely damaged my client's mental health and impeded her recovery." He presented screenshots of text messages I had sent to Linda during her previous episodes, messages offering help and support that he reframed as evidence of stalking behavior. He played recordings of voicemails where I begged Linda to take her medication conversations he described as coercive attempts to control my client's medical decisions, Most devastatingly, he presented testimony from Carol and Bob that painted my decades of caregiving as evidence of an unhealthy obsession with Linda's life. According to their statements, I had isolated Linda from supportive family relationships, had refused to respect appropriate boundaries, and had escalated normal family conflicts into legal crises due to my need for control. Carol took the witness stand with the composed confidence of someone who had spent months preparing for this moment. She described me as a mother whose codependency had prevented Linda from developing healthy independence, whose professional training had made me view family problems as criminal matters requiring law enforcement intervention. Helen has always needed to be in control, she testified with practiced sorrow. Even as children, she couldn't let Linda make her own mistakes or learn from her experiences. She's turned motherhood into a form of policing, treating her own daughter like a suspect rather than a person who needs compassion and understanding. The judge listened with the detached attention of someone processing routine paperwork, occasionally making notes, but showing no sign that he understood the profound injustice unfolding in his courtroom. To him, this was just another family dispute, another case of domestic drama that needed to be resolved through legal boundaries and restraining orders. But the most agonizing part of the hearing was watching Linda herself take the stand. My beautiful daughter, heavily sedated on medications that made her speech slurred and her movements clumsy, repeated fragmented versions of Carol's accusations with the disconnected voice of someone who wasn't entirely present in her own testimony. "My mom never let me be independent," she said, staring somewhere past my shoulder rather than looking at me directly. "She always wanted to control everything I did. She made me feel like I was always in trouble, like I couldn't make my own decisions about my life." Her words were clearly rehearsed, coached responses that bore little resemblance to our actual relationship, but they were devastating nonetheless. This was Linda's official version of our history, the narrative that would be entered into legal records and used to justify my permanent banishment from her life. When Davies asked her about the night she attacked Mark, Linda's response was a masterpiece of manipulation disguised as victim advocacy. "I don't really remember what happened," she said in that same disconnected voice. "I was having an episode, and Mom called the police instead of trying to help me. She knows I have mental illness, but she treated me like a criminal instead of getting me medical attention." The implication was clear. I had criminalized Linda's illness, had chosen punishment over treatment, had failed in my most basic duty as a mother to protect my child from a system that didn't understand mental health issues. Mark was present in the courtroom, sitting in the gallery with tears streaming down his face as he watched his sister's testimony. When he tried to interject to remind everyone that Linda had actually injured him, that the blood on my kitchen floor had been real, the judge silenced him with a sharp rebuke about courtroom decorum. "Young man, this is not the time or place for outbursts. If you can't control yourself, you'll be removed from the proceedings." Mark's helplessness in that moment, his inability to speak the truth about what had happened to him, amplified my own sense of powerlessness. We were both victims of Linda's violence, but the legal system was treating us like the perpetrators, as if our desire for safety and accountability was somehow cruel or inappropriate. The judge's ruling was delivered with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had made similar decisions hundreds of times before. He upheld the protective order formally separating me from Linda and denying me any legal access to information about her medical care or legal proceedings. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, reading from a prepared statement, "while the court recognizes your concern for your daughter's welfare, The evidence presented suggests that your continued involvement in her life is detrimental to her recovery. The protective order will remain in place indefinitely, and any violation will result in immediate arrest and prosecution. I sat in that courtroom, listening to my maternal love being redefined as criminal harassment, watching my attempts to protect Mark being reframed as evidence of my instability, feeling the weight of a legal system that had been systematically manipulated to serve my family's lies. But what hurt most was the sight of Carol sitting in the gallery, a small smile of satisfaction playing at the corners of her mouth as the judge delivered his ruling. She had successfully weaponized Linda's illness, turned the court system into another tool for punishing me, and convinced a judge that my 25 years of police service and my lifetime of dedication to my children were actually evidence of my dangerous character. As I was led from the courtroom, legally prohibited from speaking to my own daughter, I felt something cold and determined settling in my chest. They had used the law to silence me, but they had forgotten that I knew how to build cases that would hold up under scrutiny. The evidence I had been collecting, the recordings, I had made the documentation of their manipulation, all of it was still waiting to be revealed. They thought they had won, but they had actually given me everything I needed to expose their lies in a forum where the truth would finally matter more than their carefully constructed narrative. The final financial assault began exactly 6 months after Linda's arrest, launched with the precision of a military operation designed to strip away every vestige of my independence and dignity. Carol and Bob, working with Mr. Davies, had spent those months laying the groundwork for my complete destruction, and now they were ready to deliver the killing blow. The lawsuit papers that arrived at the shelter were thick with legal jargon designed to intimidate and overwhelm. Carol was suing me for $2 million, claiming that my abuse of Linda and my harassment of the family had caused severe emotional distress and damaged Linda's prospects for recovery. The document painted me as a vindictive former police officer who had used my professional connections to persecute my own family, but the lawsuit was just the public face of their strategy. Behind the scenes, Carol had been working systematically to destroy my financial security and professional standing. She contacted my former police department, claiming to have evidence of misconduct during my service that raised questions about my past cases and my eligibility for retirement benefits. "I'm calling as a concerned family member," she told the pension board administrators, her voice dripping with false compassion. "Helen has been displaying increasingly erratic behavior, and we're worried that she may have been experiencing mental health issues for longer than we realized. Her recent actions suggest that her judgment may have been compromised for some time." The investigation she triggered was swift and devastating. Without allowing me to defend myself or even informing me of the proceedings, the pension board launched a review of my mental competence and professional conduct. They suspended my retirement payments pending a psychiatric evaluation that was designed to prove I was unfit to manage my own affairs. But Carol's masterpiece was her campaign to have my professional honors revoked. She convinced officials that my recent criminal behavior reflected poorly on the department's reputation and that my commendations should be stripped away to protect the integrity of the force. "Mrs. Peterson's actions have brought shame on the uniform," she wrote in a formal complaint. "Her abuse of a vulnerable family member and her harassment of mental health advocates demonstrate that she never embodied the values we expect from our officers. Watching my 30-year career being dismantled by lies was almost more painful than losing my family. the commendations I had earned for bravery, the recognition I had received for my work with domestic violence victims, the respect I had built through decades of faithful service. All of it was being erased by someone who had never served anyone but herself. The eviction from my home was timed for maximum humiliation. Carol made sure that local media would be present when the sheriff's deputies arrived to remove me from the house where I had raised my children. She had leaked the story as an example of how family disputes can destroy lives, positioning herself as the concerned relative trying to help a woman whose mental illness had made her unemployable and homeless. The news crew captured footage of me loading my few remaining possessions into garbage bags, the ultimate visual symbol of how far I had fallen. The reporter described me as a former police officer who had lost everything due to family conflicts and apparent mental health issues, with no mention of my professional achievements or the suspicious circumstances that had led to my situation. My personal items accumulated over decades of life and service were sold at a public auction to cover the mounting legal fees and court costs. My police uniforms, my family photographs, my furniture and keepsakes, everything that represented my identity and history was reduced to lot numbers and bid amounts. Carol attended the auction, not to bid on anything, but to witness my final humiliation. She stood in my driveway with Bob, both of them taking photos, as strangers loaded my life's possessions into their cars and trucks. When our eyes met across the yard, she gave me a small wave as if we were old friends, greeting each other at a pleasant social event. But Carol's cruelest gesture was yet to come. Using money that included my own stolen retirement savings, she and Bob purchased a custom-built wellness center that they dedicated to Linda's recovery and healing. The facility was designed to house their collection of mental health resources and to serve as a base for their new advocacy work. The dedication ceremony was covered by local media, with Carol giving interviews about the importance of supporting families in crisis and protecting vulnerable individuals from those who would exploit their conditions. She spoke movingly about Linda's struggles and their family's commitment to her recovery. "We wanted to create something positive out of a tragic situation," she said with practiced sincerity. "This center represents our belief that love and support can overcome even the most difficult family challenges." The building cost over $150,000 money that represented not just my stolen savings, but also the liquidation of my entire life's work. But Carol presented it as evidence of their compassion and dedication, a noble cause that justified their control of Linda's care and their exclusion of me from her life. The physical and emotional toll of this systematic destruction finally overwhelmed my body's ability to endure. I had lost 20 pounds in 2 months, couldn't sleep more than a few hours at a time, and was experiencing chest pains that I attributed to stress and poor nutrition. The heart attack struck without warning, dropping me to the floor of the shelter's common room as I was reading yet another legal notice about my financial obligations. The paramedics who responded treated me with professional competence, but little warmth. Another elderly indigent whose body had given out under circumstances they had seen too many times before. As they worked to stabilize my heart in the ambulance, I drifted in and out of consciousness, my mind floating between the present crisis and memories from my past. In those moments between awareness and oblivion, a suppressed memory surfaced with startling clarity. I was back on duty 15 years earlier, responding to a domestic dispute call that had seemed routine until I arrived at the scene. An elderly woman had called for help, claiming that her adult children were stealing her Social Security checks and threatening her when she tried to resist. When I interviewed the family, the children presented a united front claiming that their mother was suffering from dementia and paranoid delusions. They had medical documentation of her supposed cognitive decline, witness statements about her erratic behavior, and legal papers giving them control of her finances for her own protection. But something in the woman's eyes told me a different story. Despite her fear, despite her confusion about some details, her account of the financial abuse was too specific and consistent to be delusional. I had spent hours investigating, documenting, building a case that eventually exposed the systematic exploitation and sent 2 of her children to prison. Now, lying in that hospital bed, I realized with devastating clarity that Carol and Bob were using exactly the same tactics against me. The false medical concerns, the manipulation of family dynamics, the legal maneuvering to gain control of finances, the systematic campaign to discredit the victim's credibility. All of it followed the same pattern I had seen in the worst cases of elder abuse. They had studied the playbook for destroying vulnerable people and adapted it for use against someone who should have been too experienced to fall victim to such manipulation. But they had counted on my love for my children, my desire to preserve family relationships, my reluctance to believe that my own siblings could be capable of such calculated cruelty. This memory, this understanding of exactly what was being done to me and why gave me something I hadn't felt in months, clarity of purpose. I wasn't just a mother whose family had turned against her. I was a law enforcement professional whose expertise was being used as a weapon against her, and I finally understood how to fight back. Recovery from the heart attack was slow and painful, but it gave me the clarity I needed to make one final attempt at reaching my family with the unvarnished truth. The hospital room became my sanctuary, a place where I could think and plan without the constant surveillance and manipulation I had endured for months. I decided to create a video message that would cut through all the lies and legal maneuvering, a direct appeal to Mark's conscience that would force him to confront the reality of what was happening to our family. With the help of Nurse Janet, a compassionate woman who reminded me of my younger self, I recorded a 20-minute testimonial that laid out the facts with the same precision I had once used to document crime scenes. In the video, I played the unedited audio recordings I had made of Carol's early phone calls, capturing her own words as she demanded I drop the charges against Linda. Her voice was clear and damning as she discussed her strategy for gaining control of Linda's care and her plans for punishing me for my betrayal of the family. "Listen to her voice, Mark," I said into the camera. "Listen to how she talks about using Linda's illness to hurt me. Listen to how she discusses money and control, not recovery and healing. This isn't about helping your sister. This is about destroying your mother for having the courage to protect you." But the most damaging evidence was what I revealed about Linda's condition on the night she attacked Mark. Using my professional training and my careful documentation, I explained the signs of drug intoxication that I had observed, the indicators that Linda's episode had been triggered by substance abuse rather than just her bipolar disorder. "Your sister was high on methamphetamines when she tried to kill you," I said, looking directly into the camera. "The medical reports from her arrest confirm it, but Carol and Bob have convinced everyone to focus on her mental illness instead. Linda needs drug treatment, not just psychiatric care, but admitting that would undermine their narrative about my cruelty." I also made a carefully worded reference to Carol's past financial crimes, not enough to expose the full scope of what I had covered up, but sufficient to suggest that her concern for family welfare might not be as pure as she claimed. Janet helped me send the video through a secure channel that would ensure it reached Mark directly, bypassing Carol's surveillance of my communications. We timed the transmission for a moment when Carol would be out of town on one of her speaking engagements about family crisis management, giving Mark the opportunity to see the evidence privately before deciding how to respond. But we had underestimated the extent of Carol's monitoring network. Through contacts at the hospital, through staff members, she had bribed to watch for any concerning behavior from me. She learned about the video before Mark ever received it. What Carol did next demonstrated a level of sophisticated manipulation that took my breath away. She didn't just intercept and delete the video. She had it professionally edited by someone with expertise in media manipulation, turning my desperate attempt to share the truth into apparent evidence of my complete mental breakdown. The edited version removed all the factual evidence and supporting documentation, leaving only the emotional moments where I expressed my pain and confusion about my family's betrayal. My voice was subtly altered to sound more desperate and unstable. Background noise was added to create an atmosphere of chaos and mental disturbance. Most devastatingly, Carol used sophisticated editing techniques to splice together segments from different parts of the recording, creating statements I had never made. Through careful manipulation, she made it appear that I was threatening my family, demanding money, and making wild accusations based on paranoid delusions about Linda's drug use. Carol then sold this manipulated video to a national news organization as evidence of my dangerous deterioration. She positioned herself as a heartbroken sister who was reluctantly sharing family tragedy for the greater good of educating the public about elderly mental health and the dangers of untreated PTSD in former law enforcement officers. The story aired on a primetime news magazine with the headline, "When Cops Go Bad, A Family's Nightmare." I watched from my hospital bed as my own words were used to destroy me on national television, my desperate attempt to share evidence twisted into proof of my supposed descent into paranoid delusion. The narrator described me as a former police officer whose training in manipulation and surveillance had made her delusions particularly convincing and dangerous. They portrayed my recordings as fabricated evidence, my professional analysis as the confused ramblings of someone whose career had given her dangerous knowledge about creating false documentation. Mark's response was swift and devastating. He appeared on the same program for a follow-up interview, presenting himself as a traumatized son, dealing with his mother's tragic mental breakdown. This video shows exactly why we had to get legal protection from my mother, he said, his voice breaking with practiced emotion. She's clearly very unwell, and her background in law enforcement has unfortunately given her the skills to create convincing but completely false evidence. We're heartbroken, but we can't allow her delusions to destroy what's left of our family. But the most crushing moment came when he brought his young nephew on camera, a boy I had helped raise when Mark was struggling with single parenthood. The child looked directly into the lens with the innocent concern of someone who had been carefully coached. "I love Grandma Helen," he said softly, "but she scares me now. Daddy says she's sick and might hurt people if she doesn't get help. I hope she gets better, but I don't want to see her until she does." Linda also appeared in the same segment, heavily sedated and clearly disoriented, offering confused fragments of testimony that Carol had coached her to deliver. Watching my daughter's illness being exploited on national television, seeing her used as a prop in Carol's media campaign against me, was almost more than I could bear. The story went viral on social media, shared thousands of times with comments praising my family's courage in dealing with such a difficult situation. I became a cautionary tale about the dangers of PTSD in law enforcement, an example of how professional training could be corrupted by mental illness into something harmful and destructive. But not everyone was convinced by their performance. Detective Rodriguez, my former colleague, who had been quietly investigating my case, watched the program with growing outrage. As someone with training in digital forensics, he immediately recognized signs of manipulation in the video evidence that had been broadcast. Working with other retired officers who remembered my integrity and professional standards, Rodriguez began a detailed analysis of the recordings that had been shown on television. Their examination revealed clear evidence of editing, splicing, and audio manipulation that proved the video had been deliberately altered to distort my statements. More importantly, Rodriguez had been investigating Carol's background and had uncovered evidence of her past financial crimes that I had helped cover up decades earlier. His findings supported my claims about her character and provided context for her current campaign against me. "This isn't just family dysfunction," Rodriguez told his colleagues during their strategy sessions. "This is a sophisticated fraud that uses media manipulation and legal intimidation to silence the victim. Helen Peterson isn't crazy. She's being systematically destroyed by people who know exactly what they're doing." But as I lay in that hospital bed, watching my final attempt at truth being twisted into evidence of my supposed madness, I felt something I had never experienced before, a complete understanding of how victims of sophisticated abuse can be driven to the edge of sanity by people who know exactly which buttons to push. Yet I also felt something else, something colder and more determined. If they thought they had finally silenced me completely, if they believed their manipulation of the media had destroyed my credibility forever, they had forgotten something crucial about the kind of woman they were dealing with. A good cop never stops collecting evidence, and somewhere in places they didn't know about, the real truth was still waiting to be discovered. The reckoning was coming, and it would be more complete than they could possibly imagine. The federal lawsuit that Detective Rodriguez and his team filed on my behalf attracted attention far beyond what any of us had anticipated. What had started as a case of family manipulation and elder abuse had become a national conversation about mental illness, domestic violence, and the sophisticated ways that vulnerable people can be destroyed by those they trust most. The funding for my legal defense came from an unexpected source. A forgotten police pension fund established decades earlier for officers who had suffered line-of-duty injuries had been accumulating interest in my name since a minor injury I had sustained early in my career. Rodriguez's investigation had uncovered this forgotten asset, providing the resources needed to hire the best legal team available. My lead attorney was Dr. Sarah Chen, a renowned forensic psychiatrist who specialized in cases involving mental illness and family manipulation. She was joined by Maria Santos, a victim advocate who had built her career fighting elder abuse, and Detective Rodriguez himself, whose investigation had uncovered the sophisticated fraud being perpetrated against me. Together, they filed a comprehensive federal lawsuit alleging criminal elder abuse fraud, defamation, and conspiracy charges that carried both civil and criminal penalties. The case drew national media attention because of the viral video that had been used to destroy my reputation and the sophisticated nature of the manipulation involved. The trial was scheduled to be televised, a decision that Dr. Chen felt was necessary to counter the damage done by the manipulated media coverage. Mrs. Peterson's reputation was destroyed in public, she argued. Justice demands that it be restored in public as well. When the trial began, the courtroom was packed with reporters, legal observers, and advocates who had been following the case. I sat at the plaintiff's table, no longer the broken woman who had been living in shelters months earlier. The truth was about to be revealed, and I felt a calm determination that surprised me with its strength. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment when Dr. Chen announced that we would be viewing footage from my body camera, the discreet recording device I had worn during Linda's violent episode. The courtroom fell silent as the unedited footage began to play on large screens visible to everyone present. There, in devastating clarity, was the truth that Carol and Bob had spent months trying to obscure. The camera captured Linda in the kitchen, her eyes wild with drug-induced rage, wielding the kitchen knife with deadly intent. It showed Mark's terror as his sister advanced on him, the blood spattering across the wall as she slashed his arm, her screams that she would kill him if I didn't give her money for drugs. But most importantly, it captured my agonizing decision to call 911. The footage showed my trembling hands as I dialed my desperate pleas for help, my broken sobs, as I watched my daughter being taken away in handcuffs. There was no anger in my voice, no desire for revenge, only the heartbroken desperation of a mother who had been forced to choose between her children's safety. Please help us. My voice echoed through the courtroom. My daughter is very sick, and she's hurt her brother. I don't know what else to do. Please help us. The camera continued recording after the police arrived, capturing Carol and Bob's immediate appearance at my home. Their reaction to the scene of violence, to Mark's injuries, to my obvious distress, was chilling in its coldness. You did this, Helen. Carol's voice was clear on the recording. You pushed her to this point. This is your fault for not controlling her better. You've destroyed this family, Bob added, showing no concern for Mark's injuries or Linda's obvious mental health crisis. You should have handled this privately. Now look what you've done. The footage revealed their profound lack of empathy, their immediate instinct to blame me rather than address the crisis at hand. There was no concern for Linda's illness, no compassion for Mark's trauma, no recognition that I had made an impossible choice in an untenable situation. When Linda was called to testify, the courtroom saw firsthand the tragic reality of her condition. She appeared heavily sedated, her words slurred, her movements unsteady. But when her eyes met mine across the courtroom, I saw a flicker of the daughter I remembered. I'm sorry, Mom, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't remember everything, but I know I hurt Mark. I know I scared you. I'm sorry I made you choose. Her testimony was fragmented and confused, but it underscored the tragedy of mental illness and addiction, the way severe psychiatric conditions can destroy families and force impossible decisions on the people who love the sufferer most. But the most devastating moment came when Carol was called to testify. Confronted with the unedited footage of Linda's violence, her own callous words, and the evidence of her systematic campaign against me, her carefully constructed facade finally cracked. I didn't mean, she stammered, staring at the screens that showed her own cruel indifference to Mark's injuries. You don't understand. Helen was supposed to control her. She was supposed to prevent this. As more evidence was presented showing her manipulation of the media, her lies to pension administrators, her theft of my financial security, Carol began to unravel completely on the witness stand. She sobbed uncontrollably, her composed mask slipping away to reveal the calculating cruelty beneath. I just wanted her to admit she was wrong, she wept. I wanted her to accept responsibility for what Linda became. She always thought she was so perfect, so professional. I wanted her to know what it felt like to lose everything. The admission was devastating. Carol wasn't trying to protect Linda or support family healing. She was using Linda's illness as a weapon to punish me for imagined slights that went back decades. Uncle Bob attempted to flee the courtroom when he saw Carol's confession, but court officers stopped him before he reached the exit. His own breakdown was different from Carol's, driven not by remorse, but by fury at being caught. He screamed accusations at Carol for her weakness, at the court for persecuting them, at me for refusing to accept their version of events. Mr. Davies, their lawyer, was immediately cited for professional misconduct and faced disbarment proceedings for his role in fabricating evidence and manipulating the legal system. But perhaps the most heartbreaking moment was when Mark took the stand. My gentle son, who had been torn between loyalty to his sister and protection of his own safety, finally understood the full scope of what had been done to our family. I blamed my mother for calling the police, he said, tears streaming down his face. I thought she should have found another way, should have protected Linda from the consequences of her illness. But watching this footage, seeing how terrified she was, hearing Linda threaten to kill me, I finally understand that there was no other choice. His voice broke as he continued. My mother saved my life that night, and I punished her for it. I let my aunts convince me that love meant enabling Linda's violence, that protecting me was somehow cruel to my sister. I was wrong, and I'm so sorry. Watching Mark's public reckoning, seeing him finally understand the impossible position I had been placed in, brought me both relief and heartbreak. Relief that the truth was finally being acknowledged, heartbreak that it had taken so long and cost so much for him to see it. As the evidence mounted and the truth emerged, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year, complete vindication. Not satisfaction or revenge, but simply the profound relief of having the facts finally acknowledged by people with the power to act on them. The nightmare was ending, and justice, at long last, was being served. The court's verdict was swift and uncompromising. Judge Margaret Morrison delivered the ruling with the kind of moral authority that comes from witnessing profound injustice and having the power to address it definitively. The systematic elder abuse and fraud documented in this case, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed courtroom, represents one of the most calculated and devastating examples of family manipulation I have encountered in my career. The defendants not only destroyed the plaintiff's financial security and family relationships, but they exploited a mentally ill young woman's condition to cover their crimes and silence their victim. Carol was sentenced to 7 to 12 years in federal prison for elder abuse, fraud, defamation, and conspiracy. The charges included not just the theft of my pension and the destruction of my reputation, but her systematic manipulation of Linda's condition for personal revenge. Uncle Bob received 3 to 7 years, his sentence somewhat reduced, because of his role as Carol's enabler rather than the primary architect of the scheme, though the judge made clear that his participation had been both knowing and enthusiastic. Mr. Davies faced immediate disbarment and criminal charges for his role in fabricating evidence and manipulating the legal system. His 20-year legal career was over-destroyed by his willingness to participate in elder abuse for financial gain. But the most significant decision concerned Linda herself. After extensive psychiatric evaluation and consideration of her long history of untreated mental illness and drug addiction, the court ordered her immediate commitment to a high-security psychiatric facility for long-term treatment. The evidence clearly shows that Ms. Linda Peterson is suffering from severe bipolar disorder complicated by substance abuse, Judge Morrison explained. While her actions cause serious harm, the court recognizes that she is as much a victim of this family's dysfunction as anyone else. She requires intensive long-term treatment in a secure environment where she can receive appropriate care while ensuring public safety. The decision was both a relief and a devastating blow. Linda would finally receive the comprehensive treatment she had refused for years, but it also meant our separation would be permanent and complete. The daughter I had tried so desperately to save was lost to me forever, not through death, but through the inexorable progression of an illness that had consumed her capacity for rational thought and genuine relationship. Judge Morrison's statement about my character was perhaps the most meaningful part of the verdict. Mrs. Helen Peterson, she said, looking directly at me, has been vindicated not just legally, but morally. Her lifetime of service as a police officer, her dedication to protecting victims of domestic violence, and her unwavering integrity have been maliciously attacked by people who exploited her love for their own gain. This court finds that she represents the highest ideals of professional service and maternal devotion, and that her actions on the night in question were those of a responsible parent protecting one child from another's violence. The judge went on to condemn the exploitation of mental illness for personal revenge, calling it a betrayal that strikes at the heart of everything we value about family support and care for the vulnerable. She ordered that my case be used as precedent for future elder abuse prosecutions, and that my story be included in training materials for legal and medical professionals. Watching Carol led away in handcuffs was surreal. This woman who had controlled every aspect of my destruction for so long was now powerless, facing years of imprisonment for her crimes. As they led her past my table, she didn't try to speak to me. Her face was blank empty of the calculating intelligence that had driven her campaign against me. Uncle Bob's removal was more dramatic. He continued to rant about the unfairness of it all, claiming that he had been manipulated by Carol just as much as anyone else. But his protests rang hollow in light of the evidence showing his enthusiastic participation in my financial ruin and social destruction. The financial restitution ordered by the court was substantial. I was awarded not just the recovery of my stolen pension and savings, but additional damages for the emotional trauma I had endured and the professional reputation that had been systematically destroyed. The money would restore my security, but more importantly, the court's recognition of my suffering validated everything I had experienced. But it was Mark's approach after the sentencing that truly moved me. My son, who had spent months avoiding me and questioning my motives, came to me with a face full of shame and tears. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking as he tried to find words for his regret. I was scared and confused, and I let them convince me that protecting Linda meant abandoning you. I should have trusted you. I should have remembered that you've always put our safety first, even when it broke your heart to do it. His apology was raw and genuine, filled with the kind of remorse that comes from truly understanding the magnitude of one's failure. He didn't make excuses or try to minimize his role in my suffering. He simply acknowledged his failure and begged for the chance to make amends. "I want to be in therapy," he continued. "I want to understand how I could have been so wrong about the person who raised me and protected me my whole life. I want to learn how to be the son you deserve, the man you raised me to be." Looking at Mark, seeing his genuine remorse, and his commitment to change, I felt my heart beginning to heal from wounds I thought would never close. The damage that had been done to our relationship would take time and work to repair, but the foundation was still there, built on decades of love and shared experience. Mark, I said, reaching out to take his hands. We both made mistakes during this nightmare. What matters now is that we acknowledge the truth and work to rebuild what was broken. That's going to take time and patience from both of us. The reunion was bittersweet because Linda's absence loomed over everything. The family that emerged from this legal victory was permanently changed, missing the daughter and sister whose illness had been both the catalyst for our destruction and the weapon used against us. Arthur's extended family, the in-laws who had shunned me at community events and spread gossip about my supposed instability, faced their own reckoning. As the truth emerged through media coverage of the trial, they found themselves ostracized by the same community that had once supported their version of events. But the victory, complete as it was, felt hollow in many ways. I had my reputation back. My financial security restored my relationship with Mark on the path to healing. But Linda was gone, committed to an institution where she might stabilize, but would never be the daughter I remembered. Carol and Bob were imprisoned, their lives destroyed by their own malice, but their destruction brought me no joy, only a cold satisfaction that justice had been served. As I left the courthouse that day, legally vindicated and financially restored, I felt the weight of everything I had lost. The family I had tried so desperately to hold together was irreparably broken. The daughter I had sacrificed everything to protect was lost to an illness that no amount of love could overcome. The truth had emerged, justice had been served, but the cost had been everything I valued most. Some victories I realized are too expensive to celebrate. 3 years have passed since the trial that vindicated my choices and destroyed my family, and my life has settled into a rhythm that outsiders might mistake for peace. I have returned to my house, now fully restored and financially secure, thanks to the court's restitution order. The rooms are clean and comfortable, filled with sunlight and quiet, but they echo with an emptiness that no amount of justice could fill. The physical space is everything I could want. I've restored the garden where Arthur once taught the children to plant vegetables, repaired the front porch where we used to sit on summer evenings, and even added a small library where I keep the commendations and honors that were restored to me after the trial. But these accomplishments feel hollow, like stage props in a play where the main characters have all exited. I visit Linda every month at the Riverside Psychiatric Facility, a 2-hour drive through countryside that was once beautiful to me, but now feels like a journey to a place of perpetual mourning. The facility is well run and compassionate, staffed by professionals who understand the complex challenges of treating severe mental illness combined with addiction. Linda's condition has stabilized somewhat, but she remains a shadow of the vibrant, intelligent woman she once was. During our visits, she sometimes recognizes me with a childlike sweetness that breaks my heart. Mama, she'll say, using a name she hasn't called me since she was 5 years old. Did you bring me cookies? Other times, she stares at me with the blank confusion of someone trying to remember a face from a dream. The worst visits are when she has moments of clarity, when the fog of medication and illness lifts enough for her to remember fragments of what happened between us. I hurt Mark, didn't I? She asked during one particularly difficult session. I scared you. I made you choose. But before I could respond, the moment passed and she was back to asking about cookies and wondering when she could go home. The doctors tell me that this is likely the best we can hope for. Linda will never be the daughter I raised will never have the career and family she once dreamed of, will never be able to live independently or form meaningful relationships. The combination of bipolar disorder, drug-induced brain damage, and years of refusing treatment has left her permanently diminished, a living reminder of the tragedy that destroyed our family. Mark has thrown himself into therapy and healing with the same intensity he once brought to avoiding difficult truths. He visits me regularly, often staying for dinner and spending hours talking about his recovery process and his growing understanding of the family dynamics that nearly destroyed us all. "I'm learning about something called triangulation," he told me during one of our recent conversations. How Carol and Bob used Linda's illness to put me in an impossible position, forcing me to choose sides instead of supporting the family member who was trying to protect everyone. His insights are profound, and his commitment to change is genuine, but I can see the weight of guilt he carries in every conversation. He blames himself for my months of homelessness, for the professional humiliation I endured, for the financial ruin that preceded my legal victory. No amount of reassurance from me can convince him that he was as much a victim of Carol and Bob's manipulation as anyone else. "I should have known better," he says repeatedly. "I should have trusted you. I should have seen through their lies." The guilt is eating at him, stealing his joy, and preventing him from fully embracing the future we're trying to build together. Mark also visits Linda regularly, sitting with her for hours, even when she doesn't recognize him, reading to her from books she loved as a child, showing her photos of family gatherings from before her illness consumed her personality. His dedication to his sister is admirable, but heartbreaking to witness a penance for perceived failures that may never bring him peace. Carol and Bob's fate has unfolded exactly as the court ordered. They remain in federal prisons serving their sentences in facilities hundreds of miles apart, their lives destroyed by the same calculating cruelty they once directed at me. I receive occasional updates through the Victim Services Coordinator, but their struggles bring me no satisfaction, only a weary acknowledgement that justice has been served. Their imprisonment hasn't healed the wounds they inflicted or restored the family relationships they destroyed. It has simply removed them from the equation, leaving the rest of us to figure out how to live with the damage they caused and the choices we all made during that terrible period. The professional vindication I achieved has restored my reputation in law enforcement circles, but it hasn't rekindled my passion for the work that once defined me. I volunteer occasionally with domestic violence organizations, sharing my expertise and my story with other families facing similar crises. But the fire that once drove my dedication to protecting others has been dimmed by personal loss. Mrs. Peterson, a young social worker, said to me recently, "Your experience could help so many other families understand the warning signs of manipulation and abuse. Have you considered writing a book or developing a training program?" I appreciate the sentiment, and I know that my story could indeed help others, but the thought of repeatedly reliving those months of systematic destruction for the benefit of strangers feels overwhelming. My energy is limited, now focused on the small daily tasks of maintaining my house, visiting Linda, and rebuilding my relationship with Mark. The victory in court was complete and legally satisfying, but it couldn't restore what was lost. Linda will never recover her original self. My relationship with Mark, while healing, bears permanent scars from the months when he questioned my integrity and abandoned me to face my accusers alone. The extended family that once gathered for holidays and celebrations has been scattered and broken beyond repair. I live now in a kind of melancholic peace, surrounded by the material comforts that justice provided, but haunted by the persistent absence, of the daughter I tried so desperately to save. Some nights I sit in my restored living room and remember the sound of Linda's laughter when she was well, the brightness in her eyes when she talked about her dreams for the future, the way she used to seek my advice and trust my judgment. Those memories feel both precious and painful reminders of what mental illness stole from all of us and what no amount of legal vindication could restore. I protected Mark by calling 911 that night, and I would make the same choice again under the same circumstances. But the cost of that protection was everything else I valued most in life. This is my reality now, vindicated, but lonely, financially secure, but emotionally depleted, surrounded by justice, but not by joy. The truth emerged and prevailed, but its victory feels hollow when weighed against the permanent loss of the family I fought so hard to preserve. Today, as I sit in the garden that Arthur and I planted together 40 years ago, I am surrounded by evidence of growth and renewal, yet I carry within me a sorrow that no amount of time seems to heal. The roses bloom each spring with faithful regularity, the vegetables grow strong and healthy, and the old oak tree provides shade for the bench where I spend my quiet evenings. But Linda's empty chair at the patio table serves as a constant reminder of the price paid for protecting one child from another. My monthly visits to Riverside continue, each one a journey into the heartbreak of watching mental illness rob a family of its future. Linda's condition remains stable but unchanged, her personality flattened by medication and scarred by years of addiction and untreated illness. She knows me as someone familiar and safe, but the woman who once dreamed of teaching children and building a family of her own is gone forever, replaced by someone who asks for cookies and wonders when she can go home to a place that no longer exists. Mark has grown into a man of remarkable insight and compassion, transformed by his understanding of how manipulation nearly destroyed our family. His relationship with me has healed into something deeper and more honest than what we had before, the crisis built on truth rather than assumption. But I see the weight he carries, the guilt that shadows his accomplishments and steals his capacity for uncomplicated joy. He has become a fierce advocate for families dealing with mental illness, but his dedication is driven more by penance than passion. Through this long journey of loss and legal vindication, I have learned that some victories are too costly to celebrate, and some wounds too deep to heal completely. My choice to call 911 that night was the right one, the only one that could have protected Mark from serious injury or death. But righteousness and peace are not the same thing, and knowing I made the correct decision doesn't ease the ache of everything that decision cost our family. The lesson I carry forward is both simple and devastating, that love sometimes requires us to make choices that feel like betrayal, that protecting the innocent sometimes means accepting the loss of what we cherish most. Mental illness is a thief that steals not just the person who suffers from it, but entire families' capacity for uncomplicated love and simple happiness. My story stands as a testament to the crushing weight that untreated mental illness places on families, and to the profound cruelty that can emerge when people exploit that suffering for their own purposes. But it also speaks to the importance of standing firm in truth, even when that truth destroys everything familiar and beloved. Sometimes the most loving thing a mother can do appears to be the most unloving, and sometimes protecting one child means losing another forever. I am Helen, and I am 62 years old. I am a mother who made an impossible choice, a retired police officer who learned that professional training cannot shield you from personal heartbreak, and a woman who discovered that justice and peace are not the same thing. My legacy is not one of triumph over adversity, but of endurance in the face of irredeemable loss, and of the quiet courage required to live with the consequences of doing what was right rather than what was easy. This is my story, and it ends not with restoration or redemption, but with the solemn acceptance that some sacrifices can never be undone, and some loves must be honored through letting go rather than holding on.